Hello and welcome to our Bible study. I know it's been a little while, had a hectic few weeks, but hopefully I'll be getting back on schedule here. Let's continue our study of Genesis. We've been talking about the life of Abraham. Sarah has died, and now Abraham takes this vital part in finding a bride for Isaac to carry the seed that God had promised. And this seed, as Genesis tells us, would bring forth the one who would crush the head of the serpent. Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Armenian, would be the one who would continue this line. And as we read, Rebekah will give birth to two very famous twins, Jacob and Esau. And even though, from the standpoint of the narrative of the Bible, we think of Abraham as dead and buried during this time period of the story that we're covering now. But it's not the case. When you do the math regarding what we are told about the years of Abraham and Isaac's lives, you find that Abraham not only lived to see the birth of his grandsons, but did not pass away until the twins were somewhere around 14 or 15 years old. Now, according to Hebrew legend, the day of Abraham's funeral was the day Esau sold his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of porridge. How much influence did Abraham have on the two boys in their formative years? It is really impossible to say for sure. Abraham remarried a woman named Keturah and gave birth to six more sons of his own. And Scripture doesn't really invade his privacy to tell us what his later life with Keturah consisted of, or even where in the land of Canaan it occurred. We don't know how long after their marriage Isaac and Rebekah stayed on with Abraham in the ancestral camp at Hebron, but we do know that before the twins were born, the newlyweds had established their own household several miles away from Hebron at an oasis. We have seen once before in scriptures an oasis in the southern Negev called Ber Lachai Roy. Um, and we've heard of this before. Be'er Lakai Roy is a Hebrew phrase meaning well or spring of life vision. And we were first introduced to this place in connection with Hagar's flight from Sarah shortly after she became pregnant with Ishmael. Hagar was headed back towards Egypt when she reached this oasis. Um, However, in reaching this oasis, she ran headlong into angels of the Lord, and one by one, these angels announced to Hagar not only her life vision, but the life vision of her child that she was carrying. It was Hagar who then named the place Ber Lachai Roy, well or spring of life vision. We will see a similar occurrence take place at this very same place. This time, the pregnant woman receiving a life vision will be Rebekah. What exactly is a life vision? Maybe you ask. A life vision is a vision of what an individual human life would look like if it was lived not according to the values of the dominant culture or the age or according to lust and addictions, overactive hormones, or overreactive emotions, but according to the wisdom, counsel, the purpose, and destiny of the Lord. So a life vision is a forward-looking, a divinely enhanced glimpse into the very life which God has created an individual to live. Before we get too deep into this, I have an important general question for you and for me to meditate on. And here it is. Do you have a life vision? Do you have a life vision for yourself? And if you are married or are planning to become a parent, do you have a life vision for your household? If not, are you ready to go, ready to grab hold of a life vision that God has for you? But before you answer yes, be sure to ask the Lord the cost of this fare to this particular oasis. We will not be given anywhere near as many details of God's encounters of Isaac and Rebekah as we were given about the lives and the times God encountered Abraham and Sarah. When Isaac and Rebekah are mentioned, and it's just really a brief time in the scriptures, will be left, I would think, wishing we had gotten to know them a little bit better. But their story goes by rather quickly in Genesis. Well, as we read, we'll primarily remember Isaac as the survivor of Mount Moriah, as the man who never left the land of which will become Israel, as the man who reopened the wells of his father that his father had dug, and as the man who fathered the first twins mentioned in the Bible. We'll primarily remember Rebekah as the beautiful young maiden of Haran who selflessly provided water to a stranger and his 10 thirsty camels, who later fell off one of those camels at her first sight of Isaac, and as the shrewd matriarch who aided and assisted Jacob in deceiving Isaac into giving Jacob the blessing he had intended to give Esau. Well, let's try to understand the limited information Scripture sees fit to give us concerning these two. The first thing we will learn is that their married life both started and ended in eras of sadness. First, we're confronted by, I'm going to call it a plague of barrenness. We learn from the opening verses that Rebekah and Isaac endured what we humans, in our limited perspective, perceive as a personal tragedy. Isaac took Rebekah as his wife at age 40. The twins, the only children he would father, were not born until he was 60 years old. And that means they endured 20 years of barrenness. It happened first to Sarah, and now it happens to Rebekah. So for 20 long years, it must have looked hopeless to this young couple. Isaac and Rebekah must have questioned everything and maybe even blamed the Lord or themselves. They must have wept and travailed and cried out to the Lord in both anguish and anger. At least they didn't repeat the folly of Sarah and Abram in introducing a surrogate mother into the equation in an attempt to force the Lord's hand prematurely. Isaac, of all people, knew what havoc and Ishmael in the family could wreck. Why were Sarah and Rebekah, the matriarchs of the chosen people of the Lord, the carriers of the seed of woman promised in Genesis 3:15? Of all the women in the world, why were they unable to conceive and bear children? That's probably a big question that's confronting us. Well, let's think about it. The Lord blessed Adam on the day of his creation, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply." This is found in Genesis 1:28. And after the flood, the Lord blessed Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and they did exactly with the exact same words, "Be fruitful and multiply," in Genesis 9:1. And these blessings constituted prophetic empowerments. And the physical bodies of the ancients responded quite well to this. Hence we read in our English Bibles that so-and-so begat someone, and someone begat somebody, and somebody begat somebody, etc., etc., etc. And throughout the generation after generation, people were being fruitful and multiplying. The be fruitful and multiplying blessing spoken by the Lord over humanity worked like clockwork. There was no stopping people being fruitful. Men and women seemed to multiply like rabbits, so to speak. And until we get to Abraham and Sarah, that is, it's when we get to this couple, the Lord brought all this begetting to a screeching halt, so to speak. And that's in Genesis 11:30, if you want a reminder there. We're given the stunning news here that Sarah was the first woman in recorded history of man to find herself unable to participate in the be fruitful and multiply blessing of the Lord. Why? Was there some biological imperfection or psychological malfunction in her? No, that's not it at all. The way Scripture describes it in Genesis 11:30, Sarah was, in Hebrew, was a Kara. And if you have a Strong's Concordance, it's in the Hebrew section, word 6135. And while this word has been translated into English as barren or sterile, it means much more than that. The verb root is akar, and that Hebrew word is in Strong's is 6131. It means plucked up, uprooted. The descriptive term for akara used in scriptures to describe first Sarah and now Rebecca thus refers to a female who has been plucked up, uprooted. Now it makes more sense. Sarah was not barren or sterile as we understand those concepts in our century now. What happened was that her womb was plucked up, uprooted by God. That's the implications here. And so Rebecca was not barren or sterile either. Her womb as well was plucked up, uprooted by the Lord. Well, what does that mean? Why would the Lord pluck up or uproot these two young ladies' wombs? Well, let's take a closer look. The Hebrew verb akar is closely associated with ideas of horticulture, a gardener. So a gardener will pluck out, uproot a plant or tree that is either growing where he doesn't want it to grow. Every good gardener you see has a plan, and that plan involves seeing to it that everything grows in its proper place, in its proper season. Sarah perceived this Akara status as the divine intervention that it was. And we're told this in Scripture, in quoting, Sarah said to Abram, See now the Lord has restrained me. And the Hebrew verb root, atsar, is there, very close to our words, uprooted or plugged up. So it has from bearing children. That's Genesis 16:2. So what kind of blessing is this? Because I think there was a hint that this is kind of a blessing that God was moving somehow in this barrenness at the time. But the Hebrew farmer in our midst would just smile and say that is all that matters. It is all a matter of preparing the soil for the crop the master gardener wishes to grow. It is all a matter of planting and plowing and sowing. The wombs of Sarah and Rebecca are not to be like the wombs of other women. The seed they are to nurture and carry is not to be like the seed nurtured and carried by other women. Their seed is holy, it's set apart, and their wombs must be specifically and especially prepared and nurtured. They are not just going to bear children, they are going to birth a nation set apart unto a holy God. And so the Lord plucked up or uprooted their wombs. He nurtured them with living water, and he prepared them for the most special purpose for which the womb was created. The Lord's ways are not our ways. If we were going to set about to create a people for a specific purpose, we probably would find someone who was proven to be fertile and fruitful, not someone who was barren and sterile. And we would not want to wait 20 years to do it. But the Lord had a perfect timing in mind. The world had to be ready for Esau and Jacob. They had to fit into the divine timetable established for them before the foundations of the world. And not only the world had to be ready, Isaac and Rebekah had to be ready. Canaan had to be ready. Abimelech had to be ready. And after 20 years, everything was finally ready. Even Isaac, who at last emptied himself of pride and self-sufficiency, poured out to the Lord a helpless cry from a contrite and humble spirit. So now let's take one more step and look into what Scripture has to say about what happened when the Lord finally released to Rebekah's womb the power to conceive. Rebekah's long-awaited pregnancy was it was anything but ordinary, Scripture tells us. And so this pregnancy was just, there was something unusual about the process of the babies in her womb. Scripture says, and the children would jostle violently inside her. And when this occurred, she asked, why is this happening to me? And she went to seek a message from the Holy One. Before we go any further in our story here, I want to point out that Rebekah will only have one recorded God encounter in her life. That sole God encounter is about to occur in connection with Rebekah's questioning of the Lord regarding the extreme internal conflict she was suffering in connection with her pregnancy. How severe was the trauma Rebekah was experiencing? Well, here going back to Hebrew, the Hebrew verb root used to describe the trauma is in Strong's Concordance, word 7533. It's the verb used in one place to describe the force necessary to smash a man's skull, and you'll find that in Judges 9:53. And in another place to describe the force necessary to break or dislocate a man's shoulder, and you'll find that in Ezekiel 29:7. It's usually translated to crush or to crush in pieces. This was not just a little extra kicking in the womb. Something frightening and dangerous was taking place in Rebekah's womb, and it virtually drove her to look beyond herself and to seek a message from the Lord. The following brief description is all we are told of the God encounter which followed. Scripture says, the Holy One's word to her was, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 governments will separate from inside you. The upper hand will go from one government to the other. The greater one will serve the younger. The Lord explained to Rebekah that the internal conflict she was experiencing was due to the fact that she was pregnant with twins, which were then and would always be engaged in violent struggle for dominance. But the Lord didn't just answer Rebekah's question about why she was experiencing trauma within. He went much further, advising her what she should expect from the 2 very special children in her womb. The Lord revealed to Rebekah that the suffering she was experiencing was a microcosm, a prelude to a worldwide conflict that would rage between the 2 great nations which will issue forth from the twins in her womb. The Lord told Rebekah and all of us that the 2 brothers that were then wrestling in Rebekah's womb would ultimately become 2 great nations which would maintain a constant state of counterbalance, if not conflict with each other. Their progeny would then become offsetting powers in the world with very different styles and power bases. And in some intervals in history, one would dominate in other seasons, the other would hold dominion. The balance of power would go back and forth, but in the end of times, the larger of the 2 would serve the smaller. And Hebrew scholars identify the larger nation in this prophetic message, the descendants of Esau. And a lot of times Esau is connected with Rome as well by the scholars, and the progeny that comes out of Rome, and they identify the smaller nation referenced in the prophetic message as the descendants of Jacob, or as Israel. On that, and we'll talk more on that distinction later on in our study here. But meanwhile, the violent pregnancy is being brought by the Lord to a merciful conclusion. When Rebekah's blessed day of delivery comes, Rebekah and Isaac find themselves custodians of two very different children. The one who appears first from Rebekah's body is hairy and reddish in coloring. To him, they give the name Esau, meaning hairy. And on his heels, however, and in fact holding on to his heels, is another kind of child altogether. This one is smooth-skinned and lighter of complexion. To him, they give the name Jacob, meaning something akin to heel grabber, as scriptures describe it. When the time came for her to give birth, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first one came out reddish, as hairy as a fur coat. They named him Esau. His brother then emerged, and his hand was grasping Esau's heel, and Isaac named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when these births occurred. So there's our story, or the beginnings of Jacob and Esau, and we'll carry forth in our stories in our next study. Well, blessings. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I hope I'll not miss next week, and we'll be together in 7 days. Blessings. See you later. Bye.